will tell stories that are anything alike, because every man's experience in a war is unique. So, Buck, why don't we start out by you telling us about your early life? I understand that you lost your mother when you were 9 years old. Tell us a little bit about that, and then how things went in those days.
Well, I did lose my mother when I was 10 years old, and my sister and my father didn't get along too good, so she went out and got a job. And my father and I batched together for 9 years, and until I graduated from high school, and I went from there to Peoria, Illinois, and got a job with R.G. Letourneau Company, and I worked there for a short time and made supervisor.
What did R.G. Letourneau Company make?
They manufactured earth moving equipment, and he was one of the pioneers of that earth moving equipment, heavy equipment.
So you started, that was your first real job?
That was my first job.
Did you graduate from high school?
Yes, I graduated from high school. Went directly to Peoria, Illinois.
And what happened to you in Letourneau? That was a pretty good sized company. Were they pretty busy at that time?
Oh yes, very busy. That was before the war really got going, you know, and before they had contracts, government contracts. And I did odd jobs all over the place, and finally one day they come down and said, we're going to make you supervisor, make war materials. So I made supervisor on a dear old third shift, and from there I went to different shifts, and until the war came along, and I was moved to another building and manufactured small dozers and little turnip pulls, what they called them, that they would ship in the airplanes and drop down for the troops. And I had 3 deferments while I was there, so I had to wait for the draft, and I finally was drafted March the 15th of 1944.
Excuse me, you say draft. What's that all about?
Well, they drew, I guess they drew numbers for different ones to be called up to go into service, and my number, I guess, came up several times, but the company got me the deferment, so it did help quite a bit. Maybe I should have gone there sooner, but nevertheless, I was in the war materials building, and so I got the deferments.
Okay, so this deferment business, was this a universal draft? Was everybody that graduated from high school subject to the draft?
Everybody that was able and passed exams would be drafted. Of course, you had to take exam and so forth to make sure that you were healthy enough to be in the Army or whatever service you were going to.
So they finally caught up with you after the 3rd deferment.
That's right.
What happened then?
Well, I got called up and to Fort Sheridan, Illinois, and first of all they went to Chicago and went through all kinds of exams there to make sure we were qualified, I guess. And so one thing that happened, another fellow and I wanted to be together, so we said, okay, you go first and I'll go second. So, well, let's get the CBs if we possibly can, because that was sort of on our line. We were used to heavy equipment. And so he went first, goes up to ask him. And he said, what service, branch service do you want to be in? And he said, Navy. Okay, they stamped Navy. So I go up there and I said, what branch of service you want to go in? And I said, Navy, stamped Army. So I said, wait a minute, I said, Navy. And he said, get the hell out of here. Army. Anyway, that's how I got into the Army, but I thank God to this day that I did go in the Army, because I came along pretty good with it. So I went to training down in Texas, and one thing I liked real well was the 60mm mortars, setting them up and getting them ready to go, all that. And I trained quite a bit on that. I could do it pretty fast. So they finally got through with their training, and they went to I guess Chicago, and got ready to go from there. And was shipped to out east to Fort Meade, Maryland, and then different areas, New York and so forth. Just sort of waiting to get ready to go out on the ship. And our time was, I probably set, which I don't know what it was, but anyway, we went out to, got into New York then after that, and then they took us to Boston and put us in a warehouse waiting for set up the convoy to go across to England, or not from England to France. And so they finally made it up, and we got on the ship. Boy, what a ship. Terrible food. Creamed fish.
What was the name of the ship?
I don't know. It was to me it was a Belgian Congo ship, because they didn't know what spoke English. They were all dark, you know. But they probably from Belgian Congo, I'm pretty sure they were. But anyway, we got on there, and we shipped over during the night. Was there the next day, and of course this was September, so we were way past D-Day. We were going as replacements, and the 75th Division was 75th Division was on the ship with us, and it was so crowded you couldn't find a place on the deck to sleep. Anyway, we made it over there, and they unloaded us on LSDs, and took us into shore.
Did you go directly to France from New York?
Yes, we did. And we landed in Omaha Beach. And we had to go up a steep hill. Well, of course, we got out of the LSDs in water. And why that was, I don't know, because there wasn't anybody there, there wasn't any enemy there right then. And so we went up this pretty steep hill, and I remember a big house up there at the top of the hill. Well, my second wife, Bess, and I went back on a tour of the 5th Division, the 3rd Army, really. And I looked for that house, but we couldn't, you know, they had a strict tour, and we didn't have time to go looking all over the beach where it was. But I just remember that big house up there that was all beat up. And we went from there to all over France, trying to catch Patton, which I didn't know at the time who we were trying to catch or what we were doing. We went by trucks, and we went by train, and we'd stop and have our night's rest. We finally caught up with the 5th Division.
How were you living then? Where did you sleep at night?
Oh, in tents and sleeping bags.
And you pitched a tent every night?
Yeah.
And how did the food catch up with you?
Well, the food was pretty good most of the time. I remember this one camp we were in, the bees were so thick that he put any kind of marmalade, of course, and I don't like our marmalade to this day. Put it on the bread or cracker or whatever it was, and the bees was on there real thick. None of us got stung, and that's what sort of amazed me, you know. But anyway, we finally caught up with the Third Army, and they were waiting for recruits in this Company G 10th Infantry. And it was a sergeant come up and he said, "Who'd like to be in the 60 millimeter mortars?" And I raised my hand the first thing. Because, you know, it said never volunteer when it was in training. But I did anyway, and he called me up, and so I went with them, and that was a Company G 10th Infantry.
Why did you want a 60 millimeters?
Because I trained in them, and I thought I was pretty good with it.
So did you have to pack this gun around all the time with you?
No, I didn't pack anything, only a rifle. Well, what happened was the sergeant said, "Well, we'll have to give you a test because we have another guy that's been here a long time and he wants to be the gunner." So we went back and we tested, and I beat him out. So I got to be the gunner, and all I carried was a rifle. The rest of them carried the barrel and the tripod and the ammunition and all. I was pretty happy with the rifle. So,
did you get a rating to be being the gunner?
That was supposed to be a corporal, I think, to begin with. But I got several ratings, but I never did see the money. I don't think I ever got the money.
So now that you're the gunner, where did you go?
Well, the first attack we went into was one of the scariest, I think, because you'd never been in a battle before, and we'd been in forts. We stayed in a fort overlooking Metz, France, for a month, and you can guess how dirty we were, because we never took any showers or anything while we were there. But there was some incidents here that was sort of funny. I got to tell that. Every time you'd go out, you had to go out to a latrine, or what you call a latrine, and about every time you'd go out there from this fort, they'd drop shells in on you, you know. You'd run back in. But anyway, we had an older guy with us from Nebraska, and he'd snore real loud, and you know, and at nighttime, you know, you could hear that, although we were down in this bunker. And we'd get all over him, and he'd just get so mad at us because he didn't think he was snoring, but he was. Anyway, we went back, and we was marched. This one march was 25 miles, and we'd been sitting in that fort for all that time, so we were pretty stiff. But they were loosening us up to go. But then they put us into a barn. And we had a new captain, a French captain, that was really handsome fellow, black hair, and I remember him saying, "Well, I don't know about you guys, but they're not going to get me." But I'm sorry to say the next day he was dead, he and his gunner. But anyway, we started in our first attack, and the first thing I saw was these prisoners coming back, and you could smell the tobacco on them from a distance. But they had their overcoats on, and this was November 9th, I believe, that we took off. And then we went up on this hill, and they were firing at us, and we had to stay down. They dropped mortars in on us, and it rained a lot, and the creeks were overflowing down below us, and we really had to go through that somehow to get around them. And so we were there for, probably a day and a half.
Now this You've left Metz behind you now, have you? Or are you still trying to get?
No, we're trying to get to Metz yet. And while we were there, they were firing cannons over the top of us, and the planes were dropping bombs on the other side of us. And it was quite a sight, because you'd lay there and here comes those bombs down. You could see them, and they were leaving a vapor trail on the way down. And the cannons firing over our head wasn't very, the kid coming from back home and just starting into that thing, it was pretty bad. Because you had different guys getting killed there, they were firing on us. What they had was a house up on a hill, and they had us zeroed in from there. Well, we took off then to get toward that house. We had the infantrymen were ahead of us. We were always just behind them, and so we were staying down because they were firing at us. And this one guy that I beat out from the 60 millimeter mortar, he yells over. There was a mortar came in and blew mud all over us. He said, "I'm hit, I'm hit, I'm hit." So I crawled over to him and I said, "Where you hit?" And he said, "I don't know, but I'm hit." I said, "No, you're not hit. You got mud all over you." Okay, after that, we went on through this water that was overflowed from the creek, and we finally got up on a hill after our boys had finally captured that house that was firing at us. We got up on this hill and we dug in, and the water was so much water that when you dug these foxholes, you dig a place down about 3 feet deep and as wide as you want it, and we go cut poles or something, put over the top, and put dirt over the top of that, then we crawl in there. Well, we had to dig a little place in the front of the foxhole so the water would be in there. Then we had to put brush in to keep from getting wet. And I bunked with the sergeant all the time. He was my buddy all the way through. And we got in there, and of course we had to pull duty sometime. And here come a guy along, and he says, "Hey guys," he said, "I'm lost. Can I get in with you fellas?" And my sergeant says, "Yeah, if you want to stay right in on top of us, that's the only place you can get, but you got to pull duty." "Okay, I'll do that." So anyway, we got up the next morning, and everybody, because we hadn't had any sleep for 2 days and 2 nights, and everybody our eyes were all swollen shut. And we had one fellow, Robert Rollinson, who was just one heck of a peach of a guy, and he'd do anything for you. A nice guy, and talked to you a lot. Very nice. He was I think he owned a store in Collinsville, Illinois. Anyway, he got up and he had false teeth, and he had a whole mouthful there, and he started coughing. He coughed right down in the water in the foxhole. And we had quite a kick out of that. Then after that, he said, "Something's in my pants." So he pulled his pants leg out of the boots, and here was a bullet in there. And it ricocheted off the water evidently and hit his pants, but didn't hit his leg. Anyway, we went on up further, and of course planes had been scraping, and we saw hundreds of Germans, just one right after the other on this road. Anyway, it was a pitiful sight, to see. So we went from there and went on in and finally captured Metz, but before we got them, we had to go into these big bunkers, that they had there. And one of them that we went into was three stories deep. And down at the bottom was civilians. Well, anyway, our first one we went into, I got interviewed by the Chicago Tribune, and I have that in my memoirs. But anyway, we tried to get into this one fort, Fort Nequili, and they were firing right at the door of it. And our platoon sergeant saw the flash, and he called it in and got it knocked out. So we finally got into those, and the other guys got more forts, but they were really reinforced around there. I don't know how many forts they had around Metz, but there was a lot of, and big ones. And before we jumped off for Metz, they had gotten that far, and they had bombed those things and couldn't knock them out. So that's the reason they stopped. Of course, they had run out of gas. Patton had run out of gas. They had to stop and get refurnished. That's the reason we caught up with them, I guess. Anyway, we went from there and on, captured different towns and different places, and finally ended up down at Saarburg, Germany, or France, and we were all ready for Christmas. And we decided we was going to find a tree somewhere and try to have a little Christmas somehow. But about that time, they come by and said, "Get ready to go. We're moving out immediately." Where are we going? I don't know. So we got ready and moved out, and we went on trucks and tanks and went for 2 days. We stopped overnight in one place, and then we'd go on. We finally got into Luxembourg, and did a night. I don't know what time of night it was, but anyway, they said, "Get out, find a place to sleep." So we got out. The minute we stepped off the truck, we fell in the ditch. So we just stayed there and went to sleep.
What was the weather like?
The weather was beginning to get pretty darn cold. And so we moved up a little bit further, and it was snowing, and we came to this one area where they were working on tanks and stuff, and they said, "Where's the enemy?" And he said, "Buddy, it's all around you. You better believe it." So that the truckers, took us up a little bit further, and pretty soon they said, "That's enough," and they made us all get off, and they took off. Well, about that time, the Germans were counterattacking, and we didn't have a place to go. We just had to shoot it out and defend ourselves. Well, as they were counterattacking, we finally found out that we were in the Battle of the Bulge, and this one division, airborne, I guess they were surrounded all the way around, and Patton had said that he could be up there in 48 hours, and sure enough, we made it in 48 hours and hit the southern flank of the Germans and penetrated in there, and was able to split them, and with the others coming in from the other angles, why we finally got them out of there, and they backed out. But in the meantime, there were a lot of soldiers being killed by the Germans coming in with American clothes on. People that had captured and they'd taken their clothes. And this one time, our captain, we called him Captain Snuffy. He was an old ranger, and he'd been through the D-Day. And we were in a home and a barn. Of course, the homes and the barn were pretty much attached to each other. And they brought in these prisoners, but they had American clothes on. And he told us, "Well, you guys go in the house." And I don't know what he did, but we never saw him again. But anyway, we went on and captured quite a few towns around there and got that cleaned out. We got rid of the Germans at that time and chased them back. So after that, we went to northeast of Belgium. Bastogne is in where the Battle of the Bulge was. We went from there on into towards Germany, and then finally, we had to cross the Rhine River. So we were lined up to do that, and we crossed it real easy, really. The engineers had the boats all ready for us, and we got in those and went across at night. And as we got across, we there was, I guess they had a they had it built up so the water wouldn't go flood out their crops. And I remember we were on behind that because we didn't know what was on out there, and some of the guys didn't want to go. And I remember this one sergeant said, "You're going to go because I got this gun right in your head. Now move it. And we can't stay here." So we did, and about that time we saw some planes. Oh my God, the American planes are coming through. Well, they weren't American planes. They were the last of the German, they were jets, the last of the German jets. And they were strafing the guys on the river. And so we moved on up to some of the other towns, and the Germans came back in with their planes again, and they were strafing different areas, and our ACAC guns were firing at them. And we had dug in a beet patch. They would pile up beets, cow beets, and they were all frozen at that time because it was really, really cold. And while they were firing at that, some of that flak come down and hit me right in the leg.
What were you wearing for clothing?
Oh, I meant to tell you about when we first went into battle. I wanted to tell about the clothes I was wearing. I had on summer GI underwear and winter longies over the top of it with wool pants and wool shirt, sweater, wool sweater, a heavy coat, and then our backpack on top of that with the rifle. And when we got out over the first day, we were wet. You know, most of it was sweat. But anyway, I forgot to tell you about that. Okay, while we were across the Rhine and into this town where I got hit with flak, I had gotten Luger in Frankfurt, Germany, and I was trying to show it to my guys, and I took the magazine out and everything, and I thought it was unloaded. And we were sitting at a table, and the one guy that was with me had a helmet right in front of him, and there was a liaison man there from the artillery who was standing there talking to us, and I was showing him my gun, and I pulled the trigger and it fired, hit that helmet and hit him in the leg, and he just went flop down. I thought I killed him. Boy, I tell you, I was really scared. But anyway, I finally had to go to the provost marshal and explain what happened, and everything was okay. So we went on from there, and we cleared out different towns, and some of them, Menton or something like that. We run into barracks full of Russian women. They were there for labor, making shells and so forth, and the town was full of barracks with women, and some of them were older, some of them were younger, but while we were there, we got to have a little leisure time, so I found a motorcycle and we rode that around back and forth. But we had to pull duty, and I guess to see that nobody bothered the women. Couldn't talk to him because he didn't have the knowledge of their language. But anyway, they would, I don't know how many barracks there were of them, and it was clear full. But anyway, we went from there on down to Nuremberg and on down that way, and we finally ended up in Wittenberg, Czechoslovakia. And while we were there, we met the Russians. And of course, all of us were happy. We were going to, you know, hug them and do all this kind of thing until they told us, no, you don't. No fraternization. And so, anyway, we were in this nice town. And, a lot of the Germans, or Czechoslovakians, I don't know which they were just flocking toward the Americans. And we just had, the road was full of them coming in, walking, pushing carts, and baby buggies and everything imaginable. But anyway, finally, the German officers and that came in, and of course we tried to interview them, but they wouldn't let us talk to them. They only talked to the higher ups. But they were truckloads, and I took pictures of them. And so finally the war was over then. And then we moved back into Germany then. And we occupied the lower part of Germany and moved another town or two. And we were always called out to exercise, you know, and get an account of everybody. And this one day, we ended up with a second lieutenant. Although we'd had first lieutenants and captains and everything, we seemed to keep the same second lieutenant. Awful nice guy. And after roll call, he says, "Sergeant McClain, report to CP with all your belongings." And I thought, uh-oh, I'm going to be court-martialed for shooting this fella. So I got up there, and he says, "We're going to make you first sergeant of the company." He said, "You train with this guy, he's going home." And so I was there for about 2 or 3 days, and here come another sergeant that'd been in service for a long time, and he says, "Well, I guess I'm taking over." So the lieutenant says, "What do you want to do? You want to stay over the kitchen or with the cooks, or you want to go back to your group?" I said, "Well, I want to go back to my group." So I went back with the group. And I don't remember how much time involved after that, till another morning was called out, and Sergeant McClain, report to CP with all your belongings again. And I thought, well, I don't know what I'm going to do this time. I asked my sergeant, and he says, "I don't know." So anyway, I left the guys, and I never even said goodbye to them. I said, I didn't know what I was going to do. And got up there, and he says, "You're to take this Jeep and Chalky, the cook, and report to battalion headquarters." I said, "What for?" And he says, "I don't know. You just report up there, and you just go up this road with the Jeep, and I don't know whether he told me that this captain would see me up there or not. But anyway, I got up there, and this Snuffy that we had for a captain during the Battle of the Bulge was there, and of course he knew me. And he says, "Well, you're going to be first sergeant of the group. We're moving out. I don't know where we're going, but," he says, I'll know before long." So I thought, well, I'm going to ride in this Jeep. Well, I didn't get to ride in the Jeep. I had to load up all of his belongings in the truck, and so we went in the truck, and we got to regional headquarters. Here come another first sergeant, and he says, "I guess I'm in charge over here." And I said, "Well, I was supposed to be." And he says, "Well, don't worry about it. I know what we got to do." And he says, "We got to write commendation and so forth." He says, "We'll just do it together." So we did. We stayed together, and we moved out on the trucks, and they finally told us we were going home on the advanced detail to set up camp for the rest of them coming back. And so that's what we did. We went, ended up in Camp Lucky Strike. And of course, on our way up, we went south of Paris, and coming back, we're north of Paris. And so everybody wanted to go to Paris. So they load us all in trucks, you know. We got up there and we sat. Pretty soon they come back and said, we can't go, we're moving out in the morning. So we didn't go to Paris. Well, I finally got to Paris with my second wife, and we took this tour of the Third Army. So I got to Paris. It was too crowded for me. But anyway, we went from there to Le Havre, France, and shipped out from Le Havre, France to New York. And they told us then that we're going to give you the biggest steak you ever ate. So we had a nice steak, and we went from there to Chicago, to Camp Grant area, which is near Chicago. And they gave us our orders and sent us home for 30 days. And we used to report to Camp Camel, Kentucky. So that's what I did. I had a good time at home and got to enjoy my wife and my little boy, who was only 2 years old then. His name was Roger, and went back and shipped out to Camp Camel, Kentucky, and set up camp there for the guys coming back, and got them all set up with blankets and cots and utensils for the kitchen and quartermaster material, clothing, and so forth. And I was in charge of that for that Company G. And after that was all done, well, they started coming back, and I just monkeyed around with the guys, having a good time talking with them. And I went up to the quartermaster one day and just to see what they were doing, and the same lieutenant was there, the second lieutenant, and he says, "Where have you been?" I said, "Well, I just been with the guys." He said, "Well, you know you're first sergeant of the company, don't you?" I said, "No, I don't." He said, "Well, you are." So here I am, no training whatsoever, and I had confiscated a typewriter way back, so they brought that with them. And so I started out being the first sergeant, and I didn't know a thing about it, but I learned, and I got so I could call them out every morning and account for whoever who was there, except one day they weren't all there, because we had replacements of guys that would come in from Italy or wherever that had been in service a long time, and they were very independent. So this one day I had to report that there were 4 or 5 guys missing. So that after it was all over, well, the lieutenant came down and said, "Come on, let's go look in the other barracks," because the barracks we were in was for a tank company, and they were extra barracks. So we went into, finally got into one, and the door was closed where the sergeant's quarters were. And he said, "Quiet, be quiet." So we went up there and kicked the door in, and here they were shooting craps. So you know what they got? They got duty of all kinds after that. But anyway, I acted like a first sergeant anyway, tried to, but I got a lot of help from the headquarters. We had a good master sergeant there that helped me a lot, and so did the lieutenant. He helped me a lot too. It was rough trying to keep these guys in line, because they wanted to go home. They didn't want to do anything, and you make up a roster list for KP and this and that. And, "Oh, I can't do that. I want to go home. Give me a pass." But anyway, while I was there, my wife and her aunt came down and rented a little place outside the gate, so I got to see them about every day. I went and stayed with them every night, and then came back and took care of the company, which was pretty nice. But after, I think it was about November, I had enough points to get out, so I finally got out, and before I got out, I didn't have my first sergeant stripes. And the lieutenant had one awful time trying to get it, because, you know, I was supposed to be occupation, but we were slated to go to Japan. And he worked really, really hard trying to get that, because he evidently used, when he called me up for first sergeant overseas, I guess he used that in occupation, you know, and I mean, not occupation, but in peacetime, you gotta go up a step at a time. But anyway, he finally got my first sergeant just before I got mustered out. I might want to tell about my souvenirs that I brought home with me or shipped home. One of the first things that I found a German rifle, and I wrapped it in straw and paper and tied it good and shipped it home, and got it home. And another thing I got was a German banner with a swastika on it. It's about 15 feet long, and we were defending a town where they were firing on us right across the little river, and we had to go in between buildings to get to this one place. We didn't know what was in it, but we were searching everything like GIs do, you know, and we found this big banner and flag, German flag, so I have that. And I sent home a pair of boots, German boots, helmet, an officer's map case, belt, buckles. I had, I think, 2 suits with Hermann Goering on them that they were like wool pants, sweatpants, you know, they looked like sweatpants, but they had Hermann Goering on them. But they didn't stay around too long because my wife didn't like them. And I found a lot of old coins and a lot of paper money. I still have that, and if it was good, I'd be worth a billionaire. But I did collect a lot of coins, and a lot of them are no good, but it's something maybe my grandchildren or their children might want eventually. Some other souvenirs that I got was 2 25 millimeter pistols. They weren't in working order, but they were souvenirs anyway. And where we got these was in Metz, and after we got the force, we ran into a whole cache of pile of guns, and the guys were trying them out, and they were shooting the bullets in some of them, and it's a wonder what some of us didn't get killed. But anyway, I found a 38 revolver, bone handle revolver, and I didn't find the mate to it, but a friend of mine that was there, the guy that snored a lot, he found the other one. Well, he finally talked me out of this other one. He wanted to take him home. He wanted to pair him. I'm sorry I let him have it. Then I had another one. I had a 7.65 millimeter Mauser, and another one 7.65 with a bigger barrel. I don't know where it was made. And I left that with McCook when I went over the Rhine River, and he never did give it back to me. He said he didn't know where it was, so I can guess where that went. Anyway, I finally gathered all these up, these guns that I had, and with the rifle and all, and I gave them to my grandson, who is he likes a lot of guns. He's quite a hunter. And before I gave them to him, I built him a gun cabinet to put these in. And I was up there to see him not too long ago, and he showed me how nice it looked.
You got most of those souvenirs around the time you were in Metz?
The guns were from Metz, yes.
And you went through all the rest of that. You went all across France and Germany and Czechoslovakia. You're lugging all those guns?
Lugging all those things. Yes, I did.
How did you do that? Were they in your duffel bag?
They were in my backpack.
In your backpack?
Yeah. Yeah, well, you learn to handle quite a bit of weight after a while, you know. And you don't seem to mind it, because I was only 23 years old then, so I was big and strong. I thought it was anyway.
Buck, you tell a great story. You certainly had some interesting experiences, and I'm sure you saved us the pain of some of the less than pleasant things you saw. And,
Well, yes, I didn't want to get into detail about some of the things that happened. We had quite a time crossing the river, and it was very sad. A lot of people were killed. They had dropped a mortar right in on a terrace behind us that came through the windows, and it missed me by one person. And I just didn't want to talk about it too much, but I think some of these young people need to know a little bit about it.
absolutely. We thank you for taking your time to share your story with us, and we're glad you made it home safely in spite of all the opportunities you had to get yourself offed.
Well, I think myself I was lucky all through my whole life, because I got promotions and so forth, and I got into service, and I still got promotions, and I'm proud of it. So I'm glad that I can pass this on to somebody, and my memoirs to my grandchildren, which I've got 38 pages of it. And I am now working on my personal memoirs, and there'll be a lot more pages of that. I've taken that from 4 years old on up. So I hope to get that typed up and made someday.
You found a good retirement project.
Yes, I did. I've written it so many times that my daughter has it now, and she's in the process of typing it.
Well, thank you much for sharing all this with you. It's been a great story.
Well, thank you. I was glad to do it.